A few months ago, I found myself in the middle of a season that, on paper, looked exactly how I thought a good creative season should look like. My calendar was full of meaningful projects I believed in. My task list was tidy and satisfying. I had my morning routine locked in, and I was showing up, quote unquote, in all the ways I'd once prayed I'd have the capacity to. I told myself, this is good. This is what it's supposed to feel like when you're doing what you love. But beneath the layers of carefully planned structure, something quieter was happening inside of me. Something I didn't want to name. I wasn't creating out of joy anymore. I wasn't even fully present to what I was making. I was creating to keep up, to not fall behind. I was rushing, not because anyone told me to, but because I couldn't bear the idea of slowing down. There was this subtle but persistent belief pushing through the surface that if I stopped moving, that meaning might slip away. I had mistaken momentum for meaning, productivity for purpose, urgency for fruitfulness. And what made it more disorienting was this. I spend a lot of time teaching other people about slowness, about presence, about living with a rooted spirit instead of a restless one. And yet, there I was, living entirely in contradiction to that, to the words I said I believed. Beware the barrenness of a busy life, said Socrates. This wasn't just a scheduling problem, it was a spiritual one. Because busyness isn't just about the number of things in your day. Busyness is a condition of the soul. We live in a culture that catechizes this. Every day into believing our worth is tied to our output, that faster is always better, that if you're not producing, you're falling behind. This is the water we swim in. The thing about water is, fish don't notice it. We build entire identities on what we make and forget who we are becoming in the making. And it's tricky with creative work because creativity can hide striving behind something beautiful. It looks noble, artistic, even spiritual, but striving wrapped in beauty is still striving. In Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, Peter Scazzaro writes this: you can have a creative rhythm that looks like success from the outside and still be emotionally and spiritually malnourished on the inside. The way of Jesus, as someone who practices the way of Jesus, is not the way of frantic making. It's the way of unhurried presence. It's the way of abiding in slowness. Isaiah 30 verse 15, one of my favorite verses, says, "In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength." Here's what I've come to believe. Creativity doesn't just flow out of us. It also forms us. The habits we bring to our creative practice don't just shape the work, they shape us. If my creative rhythm is hurried, if it's frantic, if it's fueled by insecurity or fear of not being enough, then the thing I make might be beautiful, but I won't be becoming more whole in the process. And that's not what I want. I want my creative life to be an act of formation, an act of communion. Twyla Tharp writes in The Creative Habit, creativity is a habit. And the best creativity is a result of good work habits. That's it in a nutshell. The routine is just a part of the creative process, as the lightning bolt of inspiration may be more. And I love that. But here's where faith deepens it. For followers of Jesus like me, the habit itself is never the end. It's a vessel, a way of showing up and saying, I'm here. I'm listening. And in my faith practice, what I've been convicted by is that Jesus regularly withdrew to lonely places, not just to escape the work, but to anchor himself in the Father before he ever put his hands to anything. Our creativity at its best, not loud or fast, is the best because it's rooted in presence, in quiet trust, in love that doesn't depend on performance. Anne Lamott once said that almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. And I love that quote so much because when I start to slow down, something subtle and sacred starts to happen. My work didn't stop, but the way I inhabited my work started to change. I wasn't trying to earn meaning anymore, and I want to call you into a different type of rhythm. I want to offer you 3 spiritual and creative practices, simple but profound, that have helped me to return to stillness again and again. Before you open your laptop, number 1, you can pick up a breath, maybe even take a couple of breaths, because what I've learned is that this pre-creation pause, before we even have the chance to create, it doesn't have to be long, 30 seconds is enough, but just breathing draws us back to God, back to meaning. Number 2, Sabbath as soil. Sabbath isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. So for those of us that might not know, Sabbath is a word that signifies a day of rest. That back in Jewish times, this practice was created by God so that people don't find worth in their work, but through this resistance and this rebellion, try to find meaning in who they are and they were created to be. Sabbath isn't what happens after the work is done. Rest is the soil from which good work grows. Pete Scazzaro says, work for God that is not nourished by a deep interior life with God will eventually be contaminated by other things such as ego, power, needing approval of and from others, and buying into the wrong ideas of success. Sabbath says, my worth is not in what I make. Sabbath teaches your soul what the world won't. And finally, number 3, listening through the practice of silence. Silence isn't an interruption to creativity. It's tuning the fork of your soul, the place where you remember why you're making anything at all. Gordon Hampton says that silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything. It's letting in rather than taking up. In silence, we stop forcing and start listening. And sometimes the most creative thing you can do is nothing for a moment. And so right now, I just want to pause and invite into the room a shared silence. 60 seconds, that's all I'm asking. Thank you for those 60 seconds. Finally, I want to leave you with this. When creativity meets stillness, the striving starts to loosen. The pressure to prove begins to quiet down. You stop creating to validate your worth, and you start creating as an act of love. I once heard someone say, slow down. You're not behind. You're just becoming. And this invitation is not to abandon your creative habits. The invitation is to root them in presence, capital P, presence, to let your making be shaped by the God who is not in a hurry. Matthew 11:28 says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. This is how we create through faith, not just for other people. This is how our work stops being another performance and starts becoming part of our formation. I continue to wish you the best, and I hope that you continue to release the pressure to perform and begin to practice a pace of presence. My name is Helen Garcia, and I hope this served you. Grace and peace. Bye.